Hello everybody and welcome back to another Pokemon tier list presented by the Game House. I'm Rob. I'm going to be your guy guiding you through this tier list today, and we're going to be doing a little bit of a smaller one that we thought would be more fun as we're getting ready for Gen 10 and some of the other great things that are becoming in 2025. We thought maybe, just maybe, it would be fun to do the first route normal Pokemon. You know, those ones that are kind of annoying, but you almost always end up catching your first time through, just to kind of see what they've got going on. You can see that list right here below you. We've got, Rattata, obviously, Sentret, Zigzagoon, Bidoof, Patrat, Bunnelby, Yungoos, Squovit, and last but surely not least, Lechonk. So we're going to be going through, we're going to be ranking these. They're going to be either in the Arceus, God tier, or Garbodor garbage tier, somewhere in between A, B, or C as well. We have compiled a list based on a few different things. I will take you through those here in just a second, but before we dive into this, please make sure to leave a like if you end up enjoying this video. Also, make sure to subscribe if you like Pokemon content. We have tier lists like this coming out. We also have Let's Plays, different questions that are getting answered, news updates, and more coming out on an almost daily basis. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button so you're not missing out on any of it. Anyways, let's continue on here. There were 4 different, categories that we ranked these on. It was by design of the Pokemon, the different stats of these Pokemon, the moves, which ones we felt like were just, had a better move pool or generally would be, good. And then we also had the usefulness tab, meaning once they evolved, what did those, Pokemon really look like? Were you keeping them essentially throughout the rest of your game? And the results were a little bit surprising. Even some of the Pokemon that maybe we thought were going to be much better, some of them start off pretty badly. The ones that we'll give you just real quick for fun, statistically, this one has no bias, right? So it was really interesting to see that statistically, Sentret was actually the worst Pokemon in terms of overall stats, all the different ones, attack, defense, all that, right? The best one was actually Squovit, and that was a huge surprise to us. It was significantly better as well, like 60 points higher, I believe, or something close to that, compared to Sentret. So definitely an interesting list, one that we thought was going to be fun, but yeah, we'll stop wasting some time and we're going to jump into it. We're going to just go from left to right, make things really easy for you. And we're going to be starting off here with the OG, right? The Rattata. Turns into Raticate, was able to get in a Alolan form that turned it into a Dark Pokemon. That definitely helped it, at least a little bit in terms of our usefulness tab, right? We didn't want to give too much points on that because, realistically, only it and Zigzagoon got new forms, both in Alola and in Galar, but we didn't see any new forms, surprisingly, for anything in the Paldea region. So we'll start with Rattata. It's a good Pokemon, right? We really think that it's one of the better designs. If you notice down here, it's literally one of the only ones that is not some variation of brown or black. Yungoos obviously has a little bit of yellow, but the primary color on this one is purple, which made it stand out a lot. Statistically, it was middle of the pack, upper middle of the pack. Its moves about the same way, and usefulness as well, right? When it turned into Raticate, it was a Pokemon that you could still use if you wanted to. I know back in the day, sometimes like Super Fang was terrifying because, especially once it became a stab move in later generations, that made it very strong. So it ended up finishing pretty well on our list overall. So we are going to end up putting it in the B tier and right near the top of it as well. It's not a bad Pokemon whatsoever. It's actually a pretty good one. And it's solid. Like we said, there's just not much else that we can say about it other than it's really solid throughout. It was one of the most consistent Pokemon when it came to where it was ranked. But it was still something that we needed to take some points off of for a few different reasons, but overall, you can't get mad about a good, solid Pokemon at the beginning of the game. Next up was Sentret, and Sentret did not have a lot going for it, as we already talked about. Statistically, it's the worst of these 9 Pokemon, which is, disappointing as well. Its moveset is pretty bad for the most part. And Furret is okay later in the game. It's not terrible, but it's not necessarily one of the best. The thing that actually carried it and kept it from being absolutely last in the Garbodor tier was it is one of the best designs. It's absolutely adorable. This little guy standing on his tail with his little rabbit-like ears, right? He's got his hands out like he's ready to give you a big hug. And for some reason, the little circle is just a really fun and nice addition to this Pokemon. But like we said, it ranked literally either at or near the very bottom in 3 of the 4 categories, which did not help it whatsoever. Had it had better, stats, better moves, we could have easily moved this one up just based on the design alone, but it's really one of the least useful ones. It would not surprise us if at some point it got a new form in maybe even Generation 10, or if they were to update its stats, that would be very helpful, but it is going to go at the very bottom of C tier, which is, again, disappointing, but that is what it is. We move on now to Zigzagoon. Now, Zigzagoon was a very interesting Pokemon, as it is a very useful Pokemon, to say the least. It ends up being, a lot of people called it an HM slave, right? Once you got into the game, especially in Gen 3, you needed Pokemon that could use Cut, Pokemon that could use Strength, Rock Smash, all that kind of stuff, right? I believe it even could learn Surf, if I remember correctly. So, you could stick 4 different things on this Pokemon, and it would be very useful. And, Bidoof would end up actually getting a lot of help from this later on as well. The problem is that it is just an okay design compared to the rest of them. It's not the worst one by far, but it's definitely down there compared to just interest and general cuteness from some of the people on our team as well. It was a struggle to rank it much higher than some of these, because almost all these designs are pretty solid, but it just was not the best by any stretch. And again, statistically, unfortunately for it, despite it being one of the top more useful Pokemon and its moves being okay, statistically it was one of the bottom 3 as well. So it was definitely disappointing for us to have to put Zigzagoon down here, but we ended up having to put it here in the middle of C tier. Yes, that means there will be one more Pokemon going down here in the C tier list, but its usefulness and its moves specifically kept it out of the Garbodor tier list, and we were happy to at least keep it up here, and we're not too disappointed by it. Up next, we have Bidoof, though, and Bidoof is pretty great, honestly. It's extremely useful. Bibarel later on ends up getting a water typing as well. I'm pretty sure, now I'm saying that, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm almost sure that it does. It's one of the few ones, along with Bunnelby, I believe. I'm pretty sure that this is the case. I don't know why I'm questioning myself now. I literally just looked it up before I started this, but I'm almost certain that, Bibarel ends up getting the water typing, which is why it ended up being the second most useful of all the Pokemon heading forward into the game. Bunnelby ends up getting the ground typing, which will help it a lot, as you guys will see once we get there. But, design-wise, it was definitely up there. It was not, 1 or 2 necessarily. It was right there, right in that top middle of the pack. It almost pushed it, it almost propelled it into being a top 2 Pokemon for us, but you can't not love this Pokemon. It's absolutely adorable. Its moves are very good. It's just that its statistics kept it from being top 2, honestly. It's still near the bottom of the pack in terms of stats. They really started to amplify the stats after a certain Pokemon here. Well, this one specifically, actually, now that I'm looking at the list. And Bidoof ends up getting itself all the way up into the A tier. It'll be at the very bottom of the A tier, but it is our highest ranked Pokemon right now. It, again, is extremely useful. The moves for it are fantastic, some of the best of all of these different Pokemon. If its stats had even been just a little bit better and there once weren't some really good designs, this Pokemon could have been a lot higher, but it ended up getting, in this spot for our list. You'll end up seeing exactly where it ends up finishing. Next up is going to be Gen 5's Patrat, and If I'm being completely honest with you, I knew the names of every single one of these Pokemon except for this one. Now, I love Gen 5. I think Gen 5 is really good, but I remember seeing this Pokemon and just being like, this guy sucks. This is not my type of Pokemon. This is not something that I wanted. This was way back in the day when it initially came out, but it seems as though I ended up being right about a few different portions of it. For starters, the design. Nobody on our team really loves the design of this Pokemon. The eyes are just a little bit too much for us, and the rest of it's just not something that really stands out or is overly memorable, which again could be stated by just me forgetting about it. Its moveset is also horrible, easily down there with Sentret, one of the worst ones. And its usefulness, Watchog is okay, but it's not great. Out of all of these other Pokemon, is probably the most, or one of the most, or least useful Pokemon that we've seen in this entire list. So it was not doing very well. The thing that almost propelled it to the top was it actually has the second best stats. Not by much, mind you. I think it was like 2 or 3 points higher than the number 3 spot. So spoiler alert, Pat Wright has the second best stats. But even with that, it was still actually just the only one that we could put down here in the Garbodor tier list. We leave these Garbodor and Arceus spots for, especially in a list this small, for one Pokemon. So it was disappointing. Really, it was. It was a shame for us to have to put it down here because, it's still a cute little guy, but it's not exactly one of our favorites. And, along with the different opinionated portions of this, it just wasn't enough for it to push its way up. It's sad because, again, statistically, it's fantastic, but basically everything else, it was just not enough to carry it. We're down to our last 4 here. We're over the halfway point, and Bunnelby is up next. Bunnelby is pretty solid overall. Its moves are fantastic. Its usefulness is extremely good as well, as it gets some ground moves, which can be very useful, not only overall, but in its game specifically. And, once it evolves into Diggersby, like, that Pokemon is probably the strongest. It's up there with Bibarel in terms of its usefulness, moving forward from this. And again, its moveset was really good, and it's honestly one of our favorite designs. It's just a cute little guy that you can't help but love. The big ears are always really fun, and it's hard to deny a little goofy-looking rabbit guy that we just really enjoyed. It's just adorable, to say the least, and it was something that really was surprising when we ended up looking at the overall rankings that so many people had ranked it so high. It ended up being our highest level on design, but the only thing that kept it really and truly from being at the top was its stats are the second worst next to Sentret's. It wasn't by much either. Sentret's is just that much worse. I think it was by like 20 or 25 points over Sentret, but it still was just not. It was just enough to keep it from being out of one of the top spots, as everything else ranked it very highly. So it will be going at the very top of our A tier. Had its stats been a little bit higher, and again, we put it into a very basic algorithm of, where was the average ranking for everything. It ended up getting the second spot. So congrats to Bunnelby, excuse me, almost said Banary, Bunnelby, and its great design and everything else. Just get those stats a little bit higher, and then we could have been talking about it in the Arceus tier. Couple more here. We've got Yungoos, or Yungoos, excuse me, Yungoos. Yungoos is okay. It was consistently middle to lower middle tier on just about everything. Statistically, it is right in the middle of the pack. Usefulness is pretty strong, right? Gumshoes is a pretty good Pokemon. It's, one of the first trial Pokemon in Sun and Moon. And the big thing that was holding it back realistically was the moves. Moves were not exactly its strong suit. It did not have a great moveset. It wasn't a bad one, but it wasn't enough to really distinguish it. It wasn't enough to be like, oh, this is a really good Pokemon moving forward. Also, a lot of people didn't really love the design of this Pokemon, not because it looks very aggressive, similar to Patrat, but also it just kind of has that weird yellow hair that's doesn't leave a good impression in people's minds, and is a Pokemon that I think a lot of people got kind of annoyed with, especially during Sun and Moon. So it wasn't necessarily just a popularity contest. It did okay in the design category. It just wasn't one of the top 5 by any stretch. And it will be rounding out, though, because of its good stats, because of its usefulness as you go on through the game and just in general. It is going to be at the top of our C tier list. So good stuff there. Last, we've got Skwovet, and we have Lechonk, obviously. And we're going to just kind of give these two... No, we won't do side by side. I'm going to just kind of, I think, describe these separately, and then kind of let you guys know where they end up so that we don't ruin which one's going to end up being in the Arceus tier. One of them ended up... Well, actually, neither of them really ended up finishing near the top in design. So keep that in mind. They were both pretty much middle of the pack. They were both near the very top in terms of stats, by the way, one of them being the most useful in terms of stats. I believe like the lowest stat ended up being somewhere around like, I think Sentry's was like 215 or something like that. And one of these ended up having 275. So a very, very distinctly large gap between the two of them. Moves wise as well, they were both pretty solid, but one of them was second behind Bunnelby in terms of moveset, just because it fits so well with what the Pokemon was, along with its stats as well. And then usefulness as well, right? One of them evolves into a very strong Pokemon, one that is used, I think, very consistently as a wall, and that alone might have given it away, while the other one is okay. It gets usefulness at the end, and it would have been probably near the bottom in terms of usefulness, but it has separate forms, so that gave it a little bit of an upgrade. If you can't tell at this point, Lechonk is the lower one, right? It was middle of the pack in terms of design and usefulness, but it was one of the highest ones in terms of stats. Finished in the 3rd spot, and its moves we generally thought were near the top as well. Not great, but not bad either. It was still middle of the pack, but in that upper middle of the pack. And it ended up finishing at the very bottom of B tier, which means that Skwovet ends up taking the Arceus tier on our tier list. Again, it's a solid design, to be honest. We had a very close race between it and Rattata for that top 3 spot. It ended up being Bunnelby and Sentret at 1 and 2 there. But the problem was it was so good everywhere else. It had the best stats by far. It was one of the best movesets, and its usefulness was really good, as throughout the game, Rodent ends up being a really solid Pokemon for you to use. So much so that it even got use, obviously, in Pokemon Unite as well. So definitely a solid Pokemon overall. And, funny enough, it's one of the, later ones, obviously, that we are getting. Pokemon learned a lot, between Rattata and Lechonk. Funny enough, they end up both being in the B tier on this tier list, but we were still very happy with the overall results of this, and Skwovet was a favorite amongst most of us, just not necessarily our favorite design. Still felt a little bit basic to a certain degree, but it was an adorable little squirrel. How could you get upset with it, but that, is going to do it for us on this tier list. Let us know what you think. Is this not necessarily where you would rank them? Where would you put some of these Pokemon? We really can't wait to hear what you guys think. These tier lists have always been really fun for us, and seeing, how much people get upset about them one way or the other is always fun as well. So, let us know, like we said. Also, make sure to like if you enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe, as we have new Pokemon content coming out on a daily basis. But that's going to wrap it up for us on this tier list. You can catch the next one next Saturday. But that'll do it for us. So with that, guys, we'll catch you on the next one.